Hello, good afternoon. My name is Luis Wanju. I'm a student at, at the Lamar State College, and I'm taking History 1302 AS with my professor, whose name is Mr. Davis. And I'm working on a video uh, presentation about book reviews. I'll be talking today about two great uh, books that the first of it is The Rise to Globalism, America's Foreign Policy Since 1938 by Stephen Ambrose, New York Beijing Books, 1971, and it has 352 pages, and it cost $18. I would say Stephen Ambrose's Rise to Globalism is a sweeping narrative of U.S. foreign policy from the late 1930s through the Vietnam era. It examines how America transitioned from isolationism to global leadership, tracing decisions that shaped the modern world. Ambrose, the author, uses a chronological approach, beginning with the pre-World War II years and moving through the Cold War, the Korea and Vietnam wars. His work is not just descriptive, it interprets the motives behind policy changes, policy shifts, and the personalities who drove them. Ambrose argues that US foreign policy was pragmatic rather than ideological. He contends that leaders like Roosevelt and Truman acted out of necessity, responding to crisis rather than following a rigid doctrine. For example, he writes, containment, and I quote, became the cornerstone of US policy, end of quote. This can be found in page 45 of the book. He emphasized that this strategy emerged as a reaction to Soviet expansion ideas rather than a preconceived plan. Ambrose also highlights the tension between idealism and realism, noting that American leaders often balanced moral principles with strategic interest. The author points of view is generally realistic, stressing power dynamics and global responsibility. His sources include government documents, presidential speeches, and memoirs, which lend some credibility to his analysis. However, Ambrose's interpretation raises questions about he suggests that US involvement in Vietnam was an extension of containment. Yet critics argue that domestic politics and miscalculations played a larger role. While Ambrose acknowledges mistake, his tone sometimes minimizes the depth of public opposition and the war's divisive impact at home. One of Ambrose's strongest propositions is that America's foreign policy evolved without a grand design. He convincingly shows the decisions were often reactive, shaped by immediate threats and opportunities. This perspective helps explain inconsistencies in US action, such as supporting authoritarian regimes while promoting democracy. Yet, they claim that pragmatism dominated policy overlooks that ideological rhetoric that often accompanied these decisions. For instance, the framing of the Cold War as a moral struggle against communism suggests that ideas mattered alongside strategy. Ambrose's treatment of the Vietnam War is particularly thought-provoking. He argues that policy makers believed withdrawal would damage US credibility, writing, and I quote, "The fear of losing face drove escalation." And this is found on page 289 of the book. This insight underscores the psychological dimension of foreign policy, though it leaves room for debate about whether credibility justified the human and financial cost. Rise to Globalism remains a fundamental text for understanding America's global role in the 20th century. Its clear narrative and balanced analysis make complex events accessible to readers. While some interpretations invite scrutiny, Ambrose's work enriches our understanding of how the United States navigated the challenges of power, principle, and responsibility in a turbulent era. Thank you very much.